A fruit vendor was attacked by a police-like official and defended herself with a knife. Thanks to the leaking of a surveillance video clip and the pressure of public opinion, she avoided being sent to a detention center. A Chinese city with over 200,000 people is under lockdown because of a CCP virus outbreak. But part of the city was already ordered to be put on lockdown one day before the new confirmed cases were announced. So how did they know? The Chinese Communist Party now wants a bigger role in the country's private sector. Our in-house expert says it's a sign of potential money extortion. And more names are coming out as news about a Chinese company's massive database of global citizens continues to attract attention. Those being monitored include the 11-year-old daughter of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now we take a look at a fruit vendor who fought back against a member of the Urban Administrative and Law Enforcement Bureau in a Chinese city. These people are not police but have some of the same rights as police, and they are commonly called Chengguan. Yang Li from the southwest Chinese city Chongqing was violently beaten at her shop last week by a Chengguan. This video from inside the shop shows Yang wearing stripes, facing a group of Chengguans at the entrance of the shop. One of them attacks her. She turns and is chased into the shop. Yang then grabs a knife to defend herself. The Chengguan's hand was injured. Before this happened, the group of Chengguan had reportedly asked her to put her fruit inside the shop. As she was busy with clients, they started to move the fruit themselves. Yang tried to stop them. Conflicts between vendors and Chengguan are common in China. Many videos online show Chengguan smashing merchandise, beating merchants, and taking away anything they sell. More than a dozen human rights activists from the same city visited Yang in the hospital Monday and sent her a banner. Reads, "Protecting the Constitution and defending human rights. You are a good citizen and a real hero." As Yang was not well enough to be interviewed, one of the human rights activists, Cang Yunshu, introduced Yang's situation to us.
She was being beaten in the head by a Chengguan at the time. She just grabbed whatever she could to defend herself. She said she didn't know what she grabbed. Chengguans have always been violent and ruthless in enforcing the law. Whether it's towards merchants or to people who lost their land and homes or underwent other injustices, they are all treated in the same way.
The shop video was released. Under pressure of public opinion, the local authorities admitted that Yang's action was a legitimate act of self-defense. But she got a warning in accordance with the Public Security Management Punishment Law because her behavior was an impediment to the official's performance of duties. The official who had beaten Yang was detained. Another human rights activist, Wei Wenyuan, called for more details on what action would be taken against the Chengguan who beat Yang.
The announcement stated that the Chengguan was detained, but it didn't mention what the punishment was, his name or title. Nothing was made public.
Yang also has medical expenses to cover. As a mother of 2 young children, the incident has put considerable strain on her family. The Chinese Communist Party issued a guideline on strengthening its control in the private sector. Our in-house expert says the new policy sends a political signal that the party may harvest profits from private companies like it did in the past. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
The Chinese regime is demanding greater loyalty from its private sector. Chinese leader Xi Jinping said the party should seek stronger leadership in its private economy. His comments come at a day after central authorities released new guidelines for it. Our in-house expert says the new move signals that the party could start to extort private companies.
It reflects that the Chinese Communist Party is eager to extort profit from China's private sector. It's eager to take control of private companies.
Tang explained one of the most important points in the new guideline is to encourage private companies to participate in mixed ownership reform. Mixed ownership refers to bringing private investment and management into state-owned companies. But Tang said for private companies, the reform means forced donation or what he calls civilized robbery.
To put it simply, through the mixed ownership reform, the regime will take over part of the private sector's earnings and intellectual property for free and transfer them to state-owned enterprises.
State-owned companies are critical for Communist Party's survival.
The Chinese Communist Party sees state-owned companies as the foundation of its regime. If state-owned companies collapsed, then the CCP's power would also be in danger. So the party will guard the state-owned companies at any cost.
Many of China's state-owned companies are debt-ridden. In 2019, China's debt topped 300% of its GDP, and state-owned companies take up the lion's share. Tang said the reform could also force private companies to pay off the debt of state-owned companies. The regime's guideline triggered intense discussion among Chinese internet users. Some see it as an attempted comeback of the party's 50s political movement, where the regime vowed to eliminate private ownership. Many businessmen were forced to submit their companies and properties to the state. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
One senior Chinese tech engineer says China's biggest problem is its lack of press freedom. Through its clever use of propaganda, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, aims to present an all-powerful front. In our part 3 of this interview, we dive into the mechanisms of the CCP's media control.
William Guo has been working as a senior Alibaba technician in China for 2.5 years. He specializes in the company's Ali Cloud technology for overseas clients and is a top expert in the industry. In his eyes, China's lack of press freedom has allowed its communist rule to run wild. Along the same line, the CCP doesn't allow the Chinese people to believe in the divine, instead casting itself as a god worthy of reverence. Guo says he considers many of the CCP's tactics to be quite scary. He mentioned the regime's use of digital currencies as an example. He pointed out the regime has the ability to work with the central bank to manipulate individual accounts. That makes zeroing out a citizen's assets as easy as deleting a computer document.
Before, if someone takes your money away, then it's no longer your money. Nowadays, they don't need to take your money, so it's still on your account. But it's not your money anymore. Then what's left for the Chinese people?
According to Guo, the older generation better understands the risk of losing their savings. That's because their previous suffering serves as a reminder. He says their experiences come from having their property taken by the CCP or seeing their family starve to death. Guo explained that his uncle died of starvation during what's known as the Great Chinese Famine about 60 years ago. His uncle was one of 30 million people who died, but it's hard for them to stand up because of fear.
Despite brutal suppression from the CCP, Chinese people can still tell good from bad. The only thing is the CCP has guns, so any attempts to fight back will be ruthlessly crushed.
The CCP controls the masses by controlling Chinese media and markets. Guo brought up a project conducted by an acquaintance. It involves simply collecting news released by state-run media during the CCP virus pandemic. But even something as simple as that is not allowed. He was later arrested in Beijing as a result and still hasn't been granted a lawyer.
If the CCP made up the news, there must have been inconsistencies. This happened during the pandemic. There were many inconsistencies. So they have to fix these problems, and the only way to do it is by deleting the news articles. That's what we see, the 404s, the not found.
In addition to attempts to erase the past, another of the regime's common techniques is to control people's ability to make a living.
The regime knows how to intensively and effectively control you, to deprive you of freedom. It won't allow you to acquire too many skills that would allow you to make a living on your own. So there is a lack of free market economy.
Guo says that compared to Americans, Chinese people generally lack necessary job skills and training. Limited abilities can lead to less instability down the road, as the job market changes and demand for certain talents increases or decreases. It often prompts increased dependence on the government, a pain Guo says is felt by many, but that no one dares to speak up about. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
One doctor's Twitter account was banned less than 48 hours after posting a controversial report. The controversy centers around virologist and whistleblower Dr. Yan Meng. Her new report backs up claims that the CCP virus was man-made in a Chinese lab. Dr. Yan's Twitter account survived for just less than 2 days. A quick search for her username reveals that the account has been suspended. Before the suspension, her account boasted nearly 60,000 followers. Having posted only a handful of times, all of Dr. Yan's posts involved the latest reports on the CCP virus. Dr. Yan previously appeared in a video interview ITV, the UK's oldest commercial network. There, she asserted that the virus was created by the Chinese military inside Wuhan's virology lab, adding she would soon release a study to back up her claim with scientific evidence. Twitter has yet to give an official explanation for the suspension. But it's not the only social media known to editorialize on virus information. Looking at another of Dr. Yan's interviews, this time with Fox News host Tucker Carlson, Facebook applied a false information warning label to the video. In it, Dr. Yan discusses the origin of the virus. According to Facebook's label, the post repeats information about COVID-19 that independent fact-checkers say is false. More virus-related trouble is breaking out in China's southwest. Chinese authorities locked down Ruili City inside Yunnan province on Monday. At the same time, all residents there were required to be tested for the CCP virus. Anyone wishing to enter or leave the city must apply for a special permit. Ruili City is home to more than 200,000 people and shares a border with Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Its lockdown follows the news that city officials confirmed 2 new infections imported from across the border. Much of the city is now deserted following a wave of panic buying when the lockdown was announced. But something strange is once again raising questions about the regime's virus-related transparency. According to the city's official website, 2 neighborhoods with more than 1,000 residents were ordered to shut down on Saturday. But the announcement came 1 day before the 2 new virus cases were made public. All residents in the neighborhoods were also advised to get tested. Now we turn to northwestern China, where a different virus is causing trouble. State media reported last week that a 2-year-old was sickened with a bacterial infection. The child marks the 5th case of the infection, now being treated in a Xi'an City hospital. The infection is highly contagious and caused by ingesting unpasteurized milk or undercooked meat from infected animals. Symptoms include fever, muscle pain, and sweating at night. But it's not the first time the sickness has appeared in the region. In December of last year, the sickness was leaked inside a pharmaceutical factory. Chinese state media reported more than 200 people were infected at the time. But this Monday, Chinese news website Caixin.com revealed the leak actually infected more than 3,000 residents, more than 10 times the official figure. The day after the Caixin report was published, Lanzhou City's Municipal Health Commission admitted that over 3,200 people tested positive at that time. More names are coming out as news about a Chinese company's massive database of global citizens continues to attract attention. The database includes detailed personal information of 2.4 million people across the globe.
It's not just prominent politicians, celebrities, and business people that Chinese tech company Zhenhua Data is monitoring. The massive database also includes their family members. The 11-year-old daughter of the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for example, is on the list of those being monitored. The Chinese company has close ties with the Chinese military and intelligence agencies. The profiles they developed include the person's age, date of birth, profession, email address, racial status, social media posts, photos, and criminal records. The database was first leaked to an independent American researcher, Chris Bowding, who later gave access to it to several media companies. Radio Free Asia obtained the name list of Taiwanese figures monitored by the Chinese company. That include a former Taiwanese president, the current foreign minister, the deputy director of the National Security Bureau, an opposition party leader, and the wife of the former president of Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company. The company is the world's largest contract chip maker and has just recently stopped supplying chips to Chinese tech giant Huawei due to U.S. sanctions. A Taiwanese information expert said that monitoring 2.4 million people is not a sufficient amount of data to start an information war. It's more likely the Chinese regime will use it to infiltrate and influence prominent figures.
This is similar to intelligence work. They target a person, but also the people around him. They will seek information about the people close to him to find ways to crack him open. It is pretty obvious that this Chinese company is close to the Chinese military and is collecting data for the purpose of hybrid warfare.
In hybrid warfare, a country aims to gain control of another nation through unconventional means. That includes shaping the information environment of the country by targeting them with disinformation, tarnishing their political leadership, and through economic manipulation. Shen said the Chinese authorities can use the data in combination with the newly passed Hong Kong national security law. The law claims jurisdiction over the entire globe and the ability to punish those who criticize the Chinese regime or who deemed as threats by it.
You might have just casually done something and then you violated the national security law. So if your online activities are captured by the CCP, once you violate the new law, the CCP can also arrest those who engaged in it with you. So this really goes against you in a legal battle with China.
In their travel advisory to China this week, the US and the UK warned citizens about the risks of arbitrary arrest and detention when traveling to mainland China or Hong Kong. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
And the Justice Department has charged 5 Chinese residents in an international hacking scheme. Prosecutors say they allegedly targeted more than 100 companies across a range of industries. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on those charges.
Charges were issued against 5 alleged Chinese hackers and 2 Malaysian businessmen accused of taking part in their criminal money-making project. According to the DOJ, the hackers went after a swath of businesses.
The Chinese defendants targeted well over 100 victims worldwide in a variety of industries and sectors that are, sadly, part of the standard target list for Chinese hackers.
They allegedly targeted social media, telecommunications, and many other types of companies. Rosen says a backdoor hack called a supply chain attack turbocharged their scheme. This is when a hacker infects the code of a product at the source, adding a backdoor for the hacker. Then that infected product is downloaded by customers.
These intrusions allowed hackers to steal source code, customer account data, and personally identifiable information.
At this point, these are just allegations, but Rosen called out the Chinese Communist Party for not working with U.S. prosecutors in taking down the alleged criminals.
I would be thanking Chinese law enforcement authorities for their cooperation in the matter, and the 5 Chinese hackers would now be in custody awaiting trial. Unfortunately, the record of recent years tells us that the Chinese Communist Party has a demonstrated history of choosing a different path, that of making China safe for their own cyber criminals, as long as they help with its goals of stealing intellectual property and stifling freedom.
According to the DOJ, the Chinese defendants also targeted foreign governments and pro-democracy politicians in Hong Kong. Last week, the White House National Security Advisor said the Chinese regime has the biggest program to interfere in the 2020 U.S. election. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows says the Trump administration will continue to review TikTok's deal with Oracle. It wants to make sure the deal is in the best interests of the United States. Meanwhile, Marco Rubio and 5 other Republican senators are calling on the administration to reject the proposal. In a letter, they said that serious questions remain about Oracle's role, the technology it would provide to ByteDance, and the future of the application's algorithm. While Chinese video sharing app TikTok faces pressure in the United States, it's been welcomed in Europe. More specifically, Ireland, where it's building new data centers. We spoke with a network security firm for more on one of TikTok's latest moves and why it chose Ireland of all places. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
TikTok has reversed course on its offer to provide its algorithm to US regulators. Revida Network's Vice President Steve Conlon says TikTok decided 3 days ago it wouldn't give the US access.
And this is very typical of Chinese companies, where they will say one thing to placate a certain audience and then roll back on it and pretend they never said it in the first place, which is Orwellian, to say the least.
He says the United States and Australia have set the tone of the TikTok debate and that it's a national security concern. But TikTok has found a safe haven in Ireland where it's building its data centres. Conlon says this is strategic because Ireland has no national security strategy.
TikTok have very cleverly moved their data protection and therefore where they will be governed into a country that has no national security culture.
He says the EU hasn't modernised enough to see apps like TikTok as part of the critical infrastructure, and it simply doesn't have the power to put restrictions on TikTok over national security concerns. He also said because TikTok's algorithm pushes content at you, there's a serious potential for it to be manipulated by a foreign entity.
To control what people see during elections, during issues where there is civil unrest, or where there's a potential for an economic or even war incident to occur. So
he said TikTok collects over 200 data requests every 9 seconds, which is an extraordinary amount of data harvesting. TikTok's reversal in disclosing its algorithm could complicate the buyout deal in the United States. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
India's army says it has stepped up logistics at a disputed border with China. Tensions escalated there in recent months.
Thousands of Indian and Chinese troops backed by tanks and aircraft are locked in an uneasy stalemate along a 45-mile-long front to the south of the Pangong Lake.
In the last 20 years, we have been able to master this. Our logistic infrastructure has been so smartly built up that today any unit or formation that comes from outside can come in plug-and-play mode and get associated with them and immediately become effective.
Meanwhile, Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said that the country had doubled the budget for vital roads and bridges along the undemarcated border with China in recent years. It's a response to Beijing's rapid infrastructure development on its side.
Our government, too, has stepped up the budget for border infrastructure development to about double the previous levels. As a result, more roads and bridges have been completed in the border areas.
Troops of the two countries are locked in their most serious face-offs for years along the line of actual control or informal border in the western Himalayas, raising fears of a broader conflict. In June, 20 Indian soldiers were killed in hand-to-hand fighting with Chinese troops in the area. Both sides had agreed to pull back after that clash, but the Indian army has accused Chinese forces of violating that accord.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen taking a tougher stance towards China in her State of Union address. At the European Parliament, she called out China's human rights abuses in Hong Kong and the Xinjiang region, home to the country's Uyghur ethnic group. She said human rights abuses must always be called out and whenever and wherever they occur, be it in Hong Kong or with the Uyghurs. She called the relationship between the European Union and China simultaneously one of the most strategically important and one of the most challenging. She added there is no doubt that China and the West promote very different systems of governance and society. She added, we believe in the universal value of democracy and the rights of the individual. Von der Leyen also called for unity among the European nations and proposed qualified majority voting. That type of voting would allow the EU to act faster on a wider range of issues without needing to wait for all 27 states to agree. The EU has a history of soft power, but that has led to difficulty in reaching consensus on issues to influence foreign policy. And the EU is following the US in proposing sanctions against those responsible for human rights abuses. Von der Leyen confirmed the European Commission will propose a Magnitsky Act soon. She said the EU needs to complete its toolbox. Von der Leyen's speech comes just after the virtual summit between the EU and China. At the summit, European Union leaders told Chinese leader Xi Jinping to open up markets, respect minorities, and step back from a crackdown in Hong Kong, adding Europe would no longer be taken advantage of in trade. While Xi Jinping was not part of the post-summit news conference, the state-owned Xinhua news agency reported that Xi rejected any interference in Chinese affairs, particularly on human rights. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is meanwhile facing criticism for her handling of China. At the conference post-summit, Merkel's 6-minute statement revealed a lot on her approach to China. In a total of 10 seconds of her speech was dedicated to Hong Kong, human rights, and minorities. Merkel had plans to open the field to European business in China by signing a historic investment treaty at this year's EU-China summit. But the global pandemic dashed those hopes by reducing the summit to a one-day virtual event. Merkel had worked hard to cultivate a relationship with China, visiting the country an unprecedented 12 times during her chancellorship. She since said she will step down after Germany's next general election in the fall of 2021. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.